The day I got married, the sky looked almost identical to the one the day he left for war as a strange gray blue, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. The same kind of stillness in the air, like the world knows something you don't. As I stood in front of the mirror, fixing my veil, I kept thinking how surreal it was to be marrying someone else. It wasn't that I didn't love Daniel. He was kind, patient, safe, but love doesn't die with death. And the ghost of a man I had buried 2 years ago still whispered in the corners of my heart. We all grieve differently, they say. But how do you grieve when there's no body? No real closure. Just a folded flag and the words missing in action, presumed dead. When the army sent me the letter about James, I didn't cry. Not right away. I remember the sound of the kettle screaming in the kitchen, the smell of his jacket still hanging in the hallway, and the way my knees gave out when I read those words for the 5th time. Then I cried for days, weeks, months, until crying became breathing. I met Daniel at a support group. He had lost his sister in the same conflict. Our pain drew us together slowly, then all at once. He didn't try to fix me. He just held space for my silence, and that alone was enough to keep me afloat. When he proposed, I said yes, not because I had fully moved on, but because I was tired of drowning in a life that had stopped moving. I thought love could grow again. Maybe not the same kind, but something new, something strong. The wedding was simple, small, family and close friends. The ceremony was set in an old garden where flowers still bloomed even in early fall. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Daniel's smile. Warm and certain. But something in my chest felt off. A flutter not of nerves, but of warning. I brushed it aside. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. People clapped. Cameras flashed. Everything felt like it was happening to someone else. I smiled. But inside I was somewhere else. Some battlefield. Some memory. Some place where James still existed. It wasn't until the reception that everything cracked open. Daniel had stepped away to speak with his brother. I was standing by the dessert table, half listening to my aunt go on about how beautiful the ceremony was. When my eyes drifted toward the far side of the garden, there was a small archway leading toward the parking lot. And just beyond it, for the briefest moment, I saw him, or someone who looked just like him. Same height, same walk, same tilt of the head, same face. James. My breath caught. I blinked hard. He was gone. I stumbled forward, my heels catching in the grass. My aunt called after me, but I didn't respond. I pushed past guests, scanning every face, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I reached the archway, then the lot, then the street beyond. Nothing, no trace, just wind and dust and the sound of my heart breaking all over again. I stood there for a long time, too afraid to ask anyone else if they saw him. Because what if they hadn't? What if I was losing my mind? Or worse, what if he had come and left because he saw me in a white dress next to another man? When Daniel came looking for me, I smiled like nothing happened. I held his hand, I danced, I cut the cake. But inside, something had shifted. My mind couldn't let go of that moment, of that face. I knew hallucinations could happen under stress. I'd read about that. But it didn't feel like a trick of the light or a tired brain. It felt real. The next morning, I woke up before Daniel. I quietly slipped out of bed, heart still pounding with questions. I pulled out the old wooden box I had hidden in the back of my closet, full of James's letters, photos, his dog tags. I stared at his face in one of the pictures. The scar on his left cheek. The sharpness in his eyes. It was him. Or it was someone pretending to be him. And in either case, I had to know the truth. Because if James was alive, if the man I buried in my heart had somehow survived, then everything I had built was standing on a lie. And if someone was impersonating him, then why? I knew what I had to do. The wedding was over. The real story had just begun. I didn't sleep for days after that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, half in shadow, half in memory, blinking in and out of my mind like a ghost trying to come through. I replayed the moment 100 times. The angle of his walk, the way his jacket moved in the wind, the brief moment his eyes caught mine and widened like he recognized me too. It couldn't have been my imagination. I'd never hallucinated in my life. And the look in his eyes? That wasn't something my mind could invent. That was James. It had to be. I didn't tell Daniel. I couldn't. Not yet. How do you say to your new husband, I think the man I buried 2 years ago showed up at our wedding? He would have thought I was unraveling. Maybe I was. But part of me felt more awake than I had in months. Years even. Like some sliver of my soul that had been frozen. Solid since the army delivered that letter had started to thaw. The next day, I went to the local police station under the guise of reporting a possible stalker. I described the man vaguely, same height, build, facial structure as James, and asked if there had been any reports of someone matching that description in the area. The officer took notes, looked bored, and finally said, "You might want to check with the VA. If he's military, he may be staying somewhere under their support programs." That had never occurred to me. If James was alive, if by some miracle he'd survived, maybe he'd been in hiding, or treatment, or worse, maybe he'd lost his memory. I started calling every nearby VA hospital and veterans center in the state. I didn't give James's full name at first. I just asked if someone matching his description had checked in recently. Most places said no. Some didn't even check. One woman on the phone paused too long before she answered. Her voice changed slightly. "We don't give out that kind of information. It's protected. Even to family?" I asked again. She said nothing and hung up. That was enough for me. The next morning, I drove 2 hours to that center with nothing but a photo of James and a gut feeling I couldn't shake. I waited in the lobby for what felt like forever, watching veterans come and go, some in wheelchairs, some walking alone. others laughing with nurses who clearly knew them well. I stared at every face, heart in my throat. And then I saw him. Not James, but someone I recognized. One of his old squad mates. His name was Tom Harper. I hadn't seen Tom since the memorial. He'd hugged me that day, looked me in the eye and said, "James was one of the best men I ever served with." I walked toward him now, and the moment he saw me, his entire body stiffened. His face paled like he'd seen a ghost. "Tom," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you remember me?" He nodded slowly. "Of course I do. I didn't know you were coming." "Neither did I said. "Can we talk?" He looked around nervously, then motioned me toward the small garden outside the building. We sat on a bench under a rusting metal gazebo. The silence between us stretched for too long. "I saw someone at my wedding," I said finally. "Someone who looked like James." Tom said nothing. "I think it was him," I whispered. "And before you say it's not possible, just look at me, Tom. I know what I saw." His eyes filled with something I couldn't read. Pity, maybe, or guilt, or both. And then he broke. "He's alive," Tom said. "But you're not supposed to know." My heart stopped. I didn't speak. I couldn't. "He was captured," Tom went on, voice low, shaky. "We thought he was dead. Everyone did. But a year after the incident, intelligence found out he was alive. Being held somewhere. The mission to retrieve him was off the books. Nobody was supposed to talk about it. Not even to family. "Why?" I breathed. "Why wouldn't they tell me?" Tom looked down. "Because when he came back, he wasn't the same. He didn't want to see anyone. Said he had things to protect. Said he'd already lost too much." Tears stung my eyes. "I'm his wife. I didn't stop loving him just because the army decided to send a folded flag." "He thought you'd moved on," Tom whispered. "He saw something online. Your engagement photos, maybe. He figured it was better to let you live. He didn't want to ruin that." My breath hitched. "He came to the wedding." "I know he did." Tom didn't answer. He saw me. He looked me right in the eyes. "Why would he do that? Why show up if he didn't want to be found?" Tom finally said, "Because he still loves you." I stood up, pacing. My whole body felt like fire and ice at once. "Where is he?" "I can't tell you." "Tom, I can't," he said firmly. "He's somewhere nearby. But if I tell you more, I'll be violating everything. And he'll never forgive me." I turned to him, desperate. "Let me see him just once. Let me choose what to do with the truth. He's not protecting me by hiding. He's hurting me." Tom's jaw worked silently, then he nodded once. "Give me a day." That night, I told Daniel I needed some time away. I used the excuse of a family emergency and packed a bag with shaking hands. As I drove to a motel just outside the city, I kept replaying everything, every conversation, every missed sign, every ache I'd buried. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a location. A coffee shop on the edge of town. I went. And when I walked through the door and saw him sitting at the back, hands folded, face older, scarred, but unmistakably, his James, I thought I might pass out. He stood up slowly. I didn't move. His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "I didn't die," he said. And then, just like that, the life I thought I'd buried came crashing back to the surface. The morning after my wedding was supposed to be filled with joy, new beginnings, and the fluttering excitement of a fresh chapter. But for me, it was suffocated by the shadow of the face I saw the night before. A face that shouldn't have existed in my life anymore. A face that haunted my every thought. Even as the sun poured golden light through the curtains, I felt trapped in an invisible prison made of memories and questions. How could someone who was gone so completely return? Just when I thought I had started to heal? The man at my wedding wasn't just a stranger with a familiar face. He was the ghost of a life I thought I had buried. I tried to push the thoughts away, to bury the feeling deep inside, but it clung to me relentlessly. Every time I closed my eyes, his eyes stared back, clear, intense, filled with pain and secrets. Who was he really? Why was he there at the very moment I vowed to start over? I spent the day trying to focus on the celebrations, the smiles, the speeches, the music, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment. I asked my closest friends about the man, but no one knew him. They thought I was imagining things, or mistaking someone else. But I knew what I saw. That night, alone in the quiet of my new home, I pulled out the faded letters my husband had left behind. Letters I had hidden in a drawer, afraid to read but desperate to understand. As I traced the ink with trembling fingers, a new layer of his story unfolded. A story I had never been told. A story that painted a picture far more complicated than the man I had loved. The letter spoke of a mission gone wrong, a secret he had kept from everyone, a mission that had torn him apart long before his death. They revealed his fears, his regrets, and a promise he had made to someone else, someone I never knew. Questions flooded my mind. Was the man at my wedding connected to this secret? Was he the living proof of the double life my husband had been leading? Or was he a ghost, a figment of my grief and longing? Unable to bear the weight of uncertainty, I decided I had to find out the truth. I reached out to the military contacts my husband had worked with, hoping for answers. But what I received was silence, vague responses, and a maze of classified information that only deepened the mystery. Days turned into weeks as I chased shadows, piecing together fragments of a past that refused to stay buried. And then one evening, I received an anonymous message, a single sentence that made my heart stop. Meet me where the war ended. Was this a trap or a chance to finally uncover the truth? I didn't know, but I had to go. The location was a small town near the border, where my husband's last mission had taken place. As I arrived, memories flooded back. The dangers, the lost comrades, the silence of a place where hope seemed to have died. Waiting there was the man from my wedding. This time, no veil of mystery, no crowd to hide behind, just two people bound by a past they couldn't escape. His voice was low but steady as he spoke of betrayal, survival, and a truth too painful to share easily. He told me that my husband had saved his life, but in doing so, had made enemies who never stopped hunting him. The face I had seen was not my husband's ghost, but his twin brother, a man who had walked out of the shadows to protect the family. I had barely begun to rebuild. Shock, confusion, and relief crashed over me like waves. The story was more tangled than I could have imagined. But finally, a piece of the puzzle fell into place. The brother had been living in hiding, watching over me from afar, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. His appearance at the wedding was no accident. It was a warning, a plea for help, and the beginning of a new battle I would have to face. The days that followed were a whirlwind of secrets, trust, and danger. As I navigated this new reality, I realized that love, loss, and loyalty are never simple. And sometimes, the ghosts we fear most are the ones who hold the key to our salvation. The revelation that the man I saw at my wedding was not my husband, but his twin brother hit me like a storm tearing. Apart the fragile calm I had tried to build around myself, I struggled to grasp the reality of it all. How could I have missed this secret? This hidden life that had silently shaped everything I thought I knew about love and loss. Every question I had ever asked about my husband suddenly took on new meaning, and every memory felt like a puzzle piece that might not fit where I had placed it. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but the weight of everything was crushing me. Instead, I listened as the brother spoke of the shadows that had followed their family, the dangers my husband had faced, and the promises made in silence, promises that had kept secrets alive and pain hidden deep inside his soul. The brother told me about the mission that had taken my husband away from me, how it was meant to be a simple operation, but had turned into a nightmare that neither of them could forget. The pain and fear etched in his voice made me realize the magnitude of what had happened and why my husband had carried the burden alone, why he had never spoken of the horrors or asked for help. The brother shared stories of courage and sacrifice, but also of betrayal and loss that no one else could understand. It was a tale of two men bound not just by blood, but by fate, intertwined in ways that had shaped their lives and ultimately led to the moment I had witnessed at my wedding. He confessed that he had come back not just to protect me, but to uncover the truth behind the betrayal that had cost his brother his life. The enemies were still out there, lurking in the shadows, threatening to destroy everything they had left behind, and now I was part of that fragile legacy. A mix of fear and determination surged through me as I realized that I could no longer be a passive observer in this story. I had to fight to protect the memory of the man I loved and to safeguard the future. For myself and for the family we had tried to build, the brother and I formed a fragile alliance bound by grief and the need for answers. We began to dig deeper into the past, tracing the final days of my husband's life and the events that had led to the mission gone wrong. Each step revealed new layers of deception and danger, reminding me that the past is never truly buried and that some wounds run deeper than they seem. We uncovered hidden messages coded in letters my husband had written but never sent, clues that pointed to double agents and betrayals within the very ranks he had trusted. The truth was a maze of secrets and lies that tested every ounce of courage I had left, but it also brought moments of unexpected connection. Moments where I saw the man I loved, not just as a soldier, but as a brother, a friend, and a man haunted by his choices. Together we faced threats that came in the dead of night, anonymous warnings and shadows that moved too quickly to catch, but with every challenge our bond grew stronger, and my resolve deepened to see this story through. To the end, I realized that this journey was no longer just about uncovering the past. It was about reclaiming my life and my future, even if it meant walking through the darkest parts of my soul. The days stretched into weeks as the brother and I pieced together the final chapters of a story written in blood and silence. I learned to trust him even as I wrestled with the pain of knowing how much my husband had suffered alone and how close we had come to losing everything we planned, carefully choosing moments to meet in safe places and sharing what we learned with a small circle of trusted allies. Our mission was clear: to expose the truth and to bring justice for the man who had given everything. We faced dangers that tested our limits, close calls and betrayals that shook our faith, but also moments of hope that reminded us why we fought and what we stood to lose. One evening, as we sat in a quiet room filled with old photographs and documents, the brother handed me a worn envelope, the final piece of the puzzle. The letter inside was from my husband, written just days before the story. A story of love, loss, and resilience, and as I walked forward, I carried with me the faces of those I loved and the promise that their voices would never be forgotten. Mission: a letter. He had never sent a letter filled with love apologies and a plea for forgiveness. It was a letter that gave me the closure I had craved, but also opened my heart to a new kind of healing, one that accepted the imperfections, the secrets, and the scars as part of the story that made us human. I realized then that love is not just about holding on, but also about letting go and finding strength in the memories that remain. The brother and I vowed to honor his memory by living lives worthy of the sacrifices made and by facing the future with courage and hope. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since my husband's death, I felt a flicker of peace, a light in the darkness that promised new beginnings, and the chance to rebuild from the ashes of pain. This was my story, a story of love, loss, and resilience, and as I walked forward, I carried with me the faces of those I loved, and the promise that their voices would never be forgotten. The weight of the past pressed heavily on my shoulders as I faced the days ahead. Each morning brought with it a new battle between grief and determination. I was no longer just a widow mourning a lost husband. I had become a guardian of secrets, a seeker of truth, and a fighter for justice. The brother's presence was both a comfort and a constant reminder of the tangled web we were caught in together. We navigated a world of shadows where every step forward revealed more dangers and deeper betrayals. I found myself questioning everything I had believed about love, loyalty, and the cost of sacrifice. There were moments when the pain felt unbearable, when the memories threatened to drown me in sorrow, but I learned to hold on to the small victories, the moments of clarity that reminded me why I couldn't give up. The brother and I uncovered evidence that pointed to a conspiracy within the military, a betrayal so deep that it threatened not only the lives of soldiers, but the very integrity of the institution we trusted. We pieced together how my husband had stumbled upon secrets that made him a target, how his death was no accident, but a calculated act to silence him forever. The more we uncovered, the more dangerous our mission became. Shadows followed us, whispers of threats and warnings that grew louder each day. Yet amidst the fear, I discovered a strength within myself, a fire fueled by love, and the desire for justice. I connected with others who had lost loved ones under mysterious circumstances, forming a network of support and shared purpose. Together, we became a force no longer willing to accept silence or lies. I began to speak out, sharing my story in hopes of shedding light on the darkness that had engulfed my life. Each word was a step toward healing and a challenge to those who wished to keep the truth buried. The brother remained by my side, a steadfast ally whose own pain mirrored mine. We talked for hours about our shared loss, the what-ifs and the dreams that would never come true. Our bond grew deeper, not just from grief, but from the unspoken understanding that some wounds are best faced together. As the months passed, I found moments of peace. Amid the chaos, small joys that reminded me life could still hold beauty. I watched the sunrise with Evan in my arms, felt the warmth of a friend's hand on my shoulder, and allowed myself to hope for a future that was no longer defined solely by loss. The journey was far from over, but I had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. I vowed to keep fighting to honor my husband, his memory, and to protect the legacy of love and sacrifice he had left behind. This was my truth, my story. And though it was filled with pain and shadows, it was also illuminated by resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The nights grew longer, and the silence of the house became unbearable. I would lie awake, clutching the memories of him, whispering his name into the darkness, hoping somehow he could hear me. I still saw his face in my dreams, clear and vivid, as if death had not separated us, but just placed an invisible wall between two worlds. The wedding day that was supposed to mark a new beginning had become the darkest memory of all. I wondered if I would ever escape the shadow of that moment. When I saw his face staring back at me from a stranger's smile, a face frozen in time, yet full of meaning, I wrestled with questions that had no answers. How could life betray me so cruelly and yet demand I move forward? I asked myself if love was supposed to hurt this much, if the promises we make in light can be broken in darkness. I did not know how to grieve and live at the same time, how to hold on to hope when the past clung so tightly to my soul. But slowly I began to understand that healing was not forgetting it, was learning to carry the pain without being crushed by it. I reached out to friends old and new, seeking comfort and strength in shared stories. Some spoke of their own losses, some whispered of betrayals that mirrored mine, and in those connections I found a fragile thread of hope. We could not undo the past, but we could build a future, no matter how uncertain. The brother and I spent countless hours sifting through evidence, tracing every lead and unraveling secrets that some wanted to keep buried forever. His determination was a constant beacon guiding me through the darkest moments. When he showed me photographs, letters, and recordings, it felt like pieces of a puzzle that would finally reveal the truth. We discovered hidden alliances and corrupt officers whose greed and fear had cost lives. We realized my husband had been more than a soldier. He had been a threat to those who thrived in the shadows, and that his death was a message to anyone who dared question. Despite the danger, I refused to be silenced. I spoke at gatherings, shared my story with reporters, and wrote letters to officials demanding answers. Each act of courage was an act of rebellion against the pain trying to consume me. I knew I was risking everything, but I also knew that if I stayed silent, I would be betraying his memory. One evening, after a long day of research, the brother and I sat on the porch, under a sky full of stars. He looked at me and said, "You are stronger than you think. You have to be for Evan and for yourself." I nodded, knowing he was right. My son was the reason. I kept fighting the future we still had to build. The wedding day remained etched in my mind, but its hold on me began to fade, replaced by the promise of new beginnings and the knowledge that I was not alone. I had found family in unexpected places, strength in vulnerability, and purpose in pain. The road ahead was uncertain, but I would walk it with my head held high, carrying the love that death could not take away. In the quiet moments, I whispered to the sky, "Thank you for the time we had and for the courage to face what was to come." My husband's face would always be part of my story, but it would not define its ending, because sometimes the greatest love is the one that teaches us to live again.